So we've got plenty of time for questions. So first up, we've got Paul Walk, and he's recently joined Adena as Head of Technology Strategy and Planning, and he was formerly of UCOLN, and Paul's going to be talking to us about a number of things. One of the things I'm really interested in is the RIOXX metadata, so handing straight over to Paul.
Good afternoon. So this is going to be a very, very quick introduction to these two things. I'm happy to take questions. I'll probably leave longer for questions than I actually speak because there's not an awful lot to say up front. So please do so. This is really describing two projects, both of which were funded by the JISC, and I do mean the JISC. This was before it became JISC. Both of them directed from UCOLN. RIOXX was, I guess, in large part my work, and V4OA was in large part the work of a guy called Sheridan Brown, who's trades under the company Chai Grove Limited. I should say, sorry, that this is actually, certainly RIOXX has been a very open project, so there's been a great deal of contribution from the wider community. It's certainly not been solely those people that have been doing this. Funding for both of these projects has now finished. It finished the day before yesterday. So the goals of RIOXX are really twofold. One was to attempt to improve the quality of metadata being exposed from our institutional repositories in the sort of common approach of OAI-PMH interfaces being harvested and generally speaking OAI-DC records being harvested over that protocol. And there, as I'm sure pretty much everyone in the room knows, there are a number of issues with the quality of metadata you're likely to get with that approach. What we've sought to do with RIOXX is to make a slight improvement. We're not trying to create a whole new elegant solution here. We're just trying to improve matters to the point where people are able to do useful things with that metadata. The other goal was really to satisfy particular requirements from RCUK, which are largely around identifying how open access outputs in our institutional repositories have been funded. So essentially who funded them and from which grant. And the principles that I was keen to adopt in this project were to build something which created the minimum possible disruption to the institutional repositories. In a way, we were learning from some hard-won lessons from previous attempts to do this kind of thing, particularly, I think, with the Scholarly Works Application Profile, or SWAP, which was introduced a few years ago and which really didn't take. And it was certainly my reasoning that one of the main reasons it didn't take was because of the perceived barrier of complexity. I don't think it was entirely true that it was too complex, but it was certainly seen that way. And perception is important with these things. Another principle was to really emphasize pragmatism over sort of elegance. So this was about finding the least we could do to improve things without getting into a sort of 3-year data modeling ontology project. And the other thing to bear in mind is that this was, and we realized from the beginning, was likely to be a fairly short-lived thing, an interim solution, because there are other technologies coming down the line. There's a great deal of interest and momentum now behind things like Serif for exchanging some of the sort of information that we're talking about here. The landscape is changing. The roles of repositories vis-a-vis the roles of CRUS systems is sort of being played out at the moment. And so we thought that really we needed to build something which would allow RCUK to get the information it needed and for the metadata quality to be improved, but something which would probably only be running for a few years. So there are lots of compromises in RIOXX, and that's a feature, not a bug. It's a good thing. So the current status of RIOXX, we've delivered a set of guidelines for repository managers about, first of all, how to use the RIOXX application profile, but also general guidelines. We've built much of what we've done has been very much informed by previous similar initiatives such as Driver, OpenAir. We certainly did look at using OpenAir and not building something new initially, but there were a number of problems with that. We found an absolute showstopper of a problem in the OpenAir application profile which prevented us from simply using it. We're also very informed by the work which went on with the Ethos application profile for describing theses. And I would say that actually we borrowed more from that than the others. That's still a pretty solid piece of work in my view, and it sort of works. So we've built the metadata application profile. This is the description of which attributes should be included in a RIOXX record, so some information about how they should be encoded, and XML XSD schemas to support validation of those. An authority file of funder names, I'll come back to that in a second. I'd like to just quickly announce that we commissioned ePrint and Atmire to develop plugins or patches for the for ePrint's repositories and for DSpace repositories, and that software is available now. There's a link from the RIOXX website, which is that URL at the bottom there. If you're feeling brave, you can download those things and give them a try. The ePrint's code is in the traditional ePrint's plugin format. It's available on the ePrint's Bazaar. The DSpace code is a patch which will need to be applied to your DSpace repositories. Atmire are piloting this with 2 repository systems, and we're hoping that we can find a few other brave volunteers to have a look at this. The authority file is an interesting thing. So one of the ways in which we could improve the quality of metadata in our records, which would appeal to RC UK, would be to improve the consistency of the ways in which funders' names are represented. And the time-honoured way of approaching that kind of problem is to provide an authority file of names. Ideally, we would want to move to a system of globally unique persistent identifiers for funders as organisations. I think we will get there, but we weren't going to get there in the next couple of years. There are a number of candidates for that kind of thing. ISNI's a good candidate at the moment. There are commercial companies that offer that kind of service, like Ringgold. But in the meantime, we don't have a globally recognised persistent identifier system for that. So we're just really going with the approach of giving a list of names so that we get a consistency of how those names are entered. Now, a data set was provided by Elsevier under Creative Commons 0 license, which is what we've used. But in the meantime, Crossref have developed a service called FundRef, using that same data, but building on it, making it available under the same terms, CC0, but actually putting an API onto it and so forth. So that work very much overlaps with what we've done with RIOXX, and I've agreed with Crossref that subject to looking at the terms and conditions a little more carefully, we will deprecate the RIOXX one in favour of just suggesting that people use FundRef. And I have to say, I don't foresee any problems with FundRef. It looks fine, and quite a few other people have looked at this. It looks solid and it looks open in a good way. Right, so I better quickly mention vocabularies for open access. Now, where RIOXX has been developed in a deliberately highly open way, we've tried to actually do the development openly and engage as many people as we can. V4OA has been a very different sort of project, and not one that I'm particularly used to doing. The problem, so the intention with V4OA, Vocabularies for Open Access, was to try to reach a consensus among some of the stakeholders in this area about, not necessarily about developing new vocabularies, but simply deciding which ones to use in certain places. And it became apparent that several of these stakeholders really needed to work in a fairly protected and private kind of way. They weren't really prepared to work in that sort of open, collegiate way that certainly I would prefer. So the V4OA project has been very private and very closed. I've not been particularly directly involved in the day-to-day activity there, but what I can say is that a number of agreements have been reached between some of the major stakeholders there. We have a sort of candidate proposal for a number of vocabularies, and I understand that this will be made openly available for public consultation in about 2 weeks' time. So that will really be, despite the fact this project's been going for some time, that will be the first time that people will have had a chance to have a look at it. What it's trying to do is to pin down how to use vocabularies to describe things like, we have phrases like open access, for example. We need to define these phrases more carefully so that we can make statements about things in repository records. And there are a number of other places. Just having an agreed vocabulary on the types of outputs which exist in our repositories, for example, is something that would be pretty useful. So look out for that. That will appear at www.v4oa.net, and I hope it will appear in the next 10 days, possibly. And finally, I just want to say a few words about the potential for work for RIOXX. So funding for RIOXX has ended. I have undertaken, and funding for UConn has ended, actually, and I'm no longer at UConn, and I'm now at Edina. So a number of things have changed in the last couple of days. I've undertaken to keep the RIOXX and V4OA websites up and running and the authority file up and running for as long as that survives. So all of these materials and so on will be available for at least another year. Beyond that, I don't know. And in terms of further development of RIOXX, and there will need to be some development to implement the outputs of V4OA, for example. I know that JISC are very keen to see this happen, but I've got no particular awareness of any actual funding or project to do that. It's possible that Balvia, who's here, will want to say something in a moment about that. Another thing which is going to be important is the implementation of a national aggregation. A lot of metadata quality enhancements are best made at an aggregation level, and there is at the moment an ITT from JISC to build that, and that's, I'm not quite sure where that's got to, but it's being assessed at the moment, I think. That's me. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Paul, for that. We're running slightly over, so we've got time for a couple of quick questions. Okay, Ian. Can I ask you to use the mic? This is for recording.
You really want to record my voice? Oh, sorry.
You need to speak quietly now you've got a microphone.
The RIOXX stuff you've got for DSpace and ePrints, are they import, export, or both?
They're, both of them do export, so they both provide an export through the OAI PMH interface. The DSpace one has a certain amount of user interface stuff and some hooks into things like the authority file list. So there's a bit more to that one, I think. The ePrints one is essentially what I think they call an export filter. Peter?
So I'm impressed by V4OA, if it's what you say it is. We desperately need it because open access is actually used by many publishers to confuse rather than enlighten. Do you believe that the process is actually being constructive at the moment, or is it full of people who are trying to disrupt it and so on? Are we going
okay, no, it's... I've been surprised how constructive it appears to have been. What I can't say with certainty yet is that we can derive a workable solution from this, but we do seem to have consensus. So I think the goal of this was consensus. Whether it's implementable is something I'll reserve judgment on for a few weeks until I've really seen it. But
I mean, I would just comment that if it can come up with a number of simple, short terms that are more precise.
Yes.
Because we need things. I mean, goal is even.
So one thing I would say is that there was a moment in the consultation, and I was very keen on this myself, which was that we got away from things like gold and said, well, let's start actually identifying the factual things which, you know, we can say, well, this is demonstrably true, and can we then build an understanding of different sorts of open access from collections of factual metadata items, rather than making up yet more kind of vague terms. And it very much seems to have gone in that direction. So I am actually optimistic, and more than I was at the beginning of the project.
Yeah. So just picking up on Paul's point, so GIST does see these as key interventions, and we're looking at the next phases and the next lot of funding. And as Paul said, it hasn't been agreed yet, but we are having those conversations, and that's just part of what we're doing at GIST, part of the transition, still figuring things out. But yes, we are in the process of looking at what the next phase is, and in terms of implementation. And obviously before implementation there is a little bit more configuration that needs to happen, and development that needs to happen. So yeah.
Okay, up next we've got Chris Keene, who is the Technical Development Manager at the University of Sussex Library, and apparently he's turning enterprisey. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you. Mine plays in quite well from Paul's, because he's actually suddenly made some of my slides obsolete already, so that's quite annoying. We'll come on to that in a second. And this is quite sort of down at the sort of the cutting edge, but rather than being exciting kind of novel things we can do with repositories, it's sort of what's happening at the moment with quite boring bureaucracy and red tape and metadata, and how that's affecting things. Let me grab the mouse. So, how to run through this quickly. I'm a repository manager. Well, I call myself a repository manager amongst other things. We're running ePrints, locally hosted. It's been running for a number of years, but only recently turned into something which was basically a box into someone's desk, my desk, into something which is more like a proper university service. And for the purposes of this 15 minutes, repository means system lots and lots of metadata in it, and sometimes you attach files to it, rather than being this lovely open access kind of thing. And I think what hits me when I was writing these slides up earlier is this really comes down to, have you got a Chris or haven't you got a Chris? Because we haven't, and that's really, if you did have a Chris, some of this stuff wouldn't apply. Probably not at all. So where have we come from the past? And I think that perhaps I'm being unfair here, and the word importance is always a relative word, but we were the fluffy, nice thing at the university, and I think in some ways libraries were, you know, we went out and we did open access, and it's wonderful, and it makes everyone be able to access stuff, and things go up, and you should do it, and it's really wonderful, and isn't it great, we've got more and more stuff, and if you put even just your metadata in, then you can access that and refer back to it. Isn't it lovely? It's beautiful, isn't it? And then we've sort of, in the last year, 2013, this year, we've turned into these kind of enterprisey kind of, you know, really worried about how that metadata looks, and how we put that metadata in, how we put stuff in, can really have a knock-on effect with the financial stability of the university, which suddenly sounds, you know, really scary, and the sort of thing which our finance and HR departments have to sort of worry with. You know, are we complying with laws? Are we able to fill our accounts? That sort of thing. So I've really felt this kind of step change in the last year, and there's sort of two things which I think have really led to that, and that's the REF and the RCUK. So I'll come on to both of those in a second. So the REF. I'm hoping most people know what it is. Very quickly, in the UK, every 6 years or so, it used to be called the RAE, it hasn't actually changed that much. All universities submit stuff to the government for review. We submit our academics, and we say, here's the publications, here's the research funding, here's the number of postgrads they've supervised, and that goes to a unit of assessment for that particular subject area, and they will assess those academics and give them a score, and then that will have a knock-on effect for our core funding for research in the next 6 years or so. And I think I should stress it's not just this nice extra money, it is core funding. If our money goes down, that may be less staff, it may be people losing jobs, it may be people can't go on conferences anymore for academics, which maybe they can't buy equipment in the sciences. There's a big knock-on effect, and of course if it goes up, wow, that's great. You know, more conferences, more equipment, more staff. Could really make it a department. Broken into different sections, the one I'm really interested in, and the one I've been working on, is research outputs, what's called REF2. So at SAT6, we're using ePrints for Ref2. I know quite a few people are. You can actually use the ePrints plugin for more than Ref2, but we're just using it for the publication side because we thought that's what makes sense. And you can also use ePrints to export the data in such a way when it's ready to be uploaded to the Hefty Ref submission system. We're not doing that. Our data warehouse, what's called Cognos, extracts data each night from ePrints, and then it collects that and other data from around campus and can turn it into some XML file that gets automatically submitted each night to Hefty. So that's what we're doing. So what's changed? Suddenly metadata, which we had this kind of like, we thought it was important and we kind of worried about how to put things in properly. We wanted to make sure it was nice and be proper librarians, even though I'm not a proper librarian, and make sure, citations were lovely and that sort of thing. But, no one's going to lose their job if it was a bit wrong. It was just our personal pride. And all of a sudden, it feels like millions of pounds could be kind of lost if we're not getting this right. And when I say right, someone here it's what Hefty says is right, which is a big difference. In the past, we would worry about the published date, and we'd worry about how you show the page numbers when actually there's article numbers, and you think, what's the best way of doing that? No more. It's what Hefty says goes, and if it doesn't matter if they're wrong, they are right. And the sort of questions you have to think about, ePrints, the way it's kind of designed out the box is that a conference item tends to presume that it hasn't been a published conference item. It's something where there's a talk somewhere and then maybe there's a presentation to go with it. If it's published, they tend to presume you're going to put it under a book section or an article. But then our informatics people say, or computer science people say, no, we want it to be a conference item. Our peers in other universities will expect this to be called a conference item and will find it odd if it's called a book section. We've had to suddenly, so suddenly this decision about how we classify these items makes a difference. Publication date, this has been one of my bugbears for years, that publication date is a complete meaningless entity now, because for us, publication date is when there's an issue number, when you have page numbers, when there's a volume. So notionally, when it became a physical journal, even though it's not really a physical journal anymore, but of course it can be online for well over a year in advance. So what is the publication date? And quite often, if you interrogate cross-ref using a DOI, that publication date isn't what I would call a publication date. What's right? It's quite important. So what's the implications for us? Well, all of a sudden we've gone really risk-averse, which I don't like, but I can kind of, it's what's happened. And all of a sudden you feel like you're doing the same sort of things that you see happening in accounting and HR after university. Now all of a sudden they say, why do we need to do this? What will happen if it goes wrong? Can we not wait till later? It's not worth the risk of it going wrong because this data is so important. We're more aware that we can't just say, hey, let's do something fun and fluffy with the system and install this plugin and see what happens. We want to make sure that senior people have said, yes, that's important, it's worth doing. It's not just that, hey, let's use all the data in the repository for the ref. This is the ref system almost. We're putting data into the system for the ref. So people in the schools would almost talk about it as the ref system at the moment. Probably not a good thing. I should just note, the ref, you don't get millions of pounds because your metadata is great. You get millions of pounds because your research is good, and I can't help with that. But we do obviously have to make sure that the metadata about it is good. And if it is wrong, if people can't judge this stuff because of what we've submitted, or we say we're submitting something because we think it's been published and it hasn't, it's because it has to be published by a certain date, maybe we'll lose out. And I'm not sure how I'd feel about that. So moving on. Wow, 1 minute. Ask UK, I'm hoping everyone's up to speed on this. That's a brief summary there. The government and its friends all said, yes, it's fantastic, and the publishers were fairly on board as well. And there's two key things for libraries and universities. How are we going to handle all this stuff, and how are we going to actually record it? Because RCUK are saying, you've got to tell us all the publications that should come out of our research funding, and tell us stuff about whether that's compliant, how it's compliant, and other stuff as well. And it's that second bullet point there, which I'm involved in. The first bullet point, well, this is what we've come up with. It's like a flow chart. I think a lot of universities have got something similar where you say, okay, is there a green option? Yeah, we're doing that because that's free. If not, we're trying to do gold. If there's no funds available or there is no gold, maybe we'll try and use the extended longer green option. That diagram took forever to come up with, even though it looks very simple now. So how do we do RC UK compliance? And this is what people said to me in March. They said, Chris, it kicks in April. By April, we need you to be compliant. We need you to say, we're going to be compliant as a university. So, okay, I went away with that. We need to be collecting all this data at HEFGI and it's like RC UK require, so we can report on this because it kicks off in April. And it will need probably that sort of stuff. However, we don't actually know yet what that data is we're meant to be collecting since April, which makes that quite hard to do. And we're not actually sure yet, as far as I'm aware, when we will know what that data will be we need to be collecting since April. But there is Vocabularies for A, which Paul Walks has mentioned for hey. And they're coming out with recommendations in /August for consultation. And that will become final recommendations in September. And then I've heard research council say, we may be using this for those recommendations of about what you're meant to be collecting since April. And this makes you really uncomfortable because there aren't really nasty people in Sussex saying you're going to lose your job if you don't do this. But yeah, they sit in meetings, they say, Chris, can you confirm to us this is all dealt with? Can you say we're all collecting data we need? And my first answer isn't yes, because I can't say yes, because I don't know what it is. So they're a bit worried about that. So what we're looking at is we're adding project information into our repository, basic stuff, because we've already got another kind of in-house system that looks at project funding, but we just need things like the core project IDs, which research council funded it, and the research council's project code, but how that will fit in with the vocab, which Paul's has talked about, not fully clear yet, but I'm hoping it will become clearer soon. And there is this sort of dilemma at the bottom here, so right at the bottom of the slide. Will the custom fields we're creating, so we're also creating custom fields for the open access bit, you know, is it green, gold, long green, what kind of license it has, when's the embargo, which may be different to the file embargo for ePrints because it's held elsewhere. What if these fields we're creating by ourselves don't quite map into the plugins and the ways that things get exported to go into things like the ROS, the research output system, or other things which we need to interconnect with. So there's a bit of a worry there about how this will pan out. So quick takeaways. It certainly feels like a bit of a different world this year. You know, what we're doing really might have an impact about how the university can operate in a stable manner. You know, these things seem to have more impact. And I think, you know, of course, what we've been doing is important, but you know, if we've got a subject heading wrong in a catalogue record, it was annoying, but no one was going to lose lots of money. And now it feels like these things could happen. So that was just a point I wanted to come up with. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot, Chris. Certainly, yeah, the feeling of turning enterprisey resonates quite strongly with what we're doing here at Edinburgh.
Yeah.
I'm sure it does for other people. We started slightly late, so we're running over, but if anyone's got any questions, I think we've got time for a quick one. Anyone's got a burning question they want to ask? I've got a quick one. So you've talked about the perils of getting things wrong. Are there any good points to the whole ref exercise for you?
Yeah, I think for both of them, people have had to use the system. Using it, for us, we want all the metadata in, and we want open access stuff in. And this has led to both of these things happening. People have put in the metadata for stuff, and they start using it for the ref, and then they start using it for other stuff as well. And then they see a screen saying, please now upload your file. So I think I might as well upload a file while I'm here. So it has led to an increase in usage, which has been, which is good. And I think we've also had funding to help tidy up the data, which has been another benefit, I think.
Okay, that's this session wrapped up. Up next, we've got the Pecha Kucha sessions. I'd just like to quickly thank both our speakers, Chris and Paul. So a quick round of applause, please.
Next, we go on to the Pecha Kuchas. If you give me a couple of minutes to get slides across and things like that, we've got 3 Q&A, and then we're down to 2. Matt Taylor will be coming on first. Can't find him, I've got his slides here. And then, Peter, is yours on your computer? It's on this machine, even better. and then Seb will be third. So if you give me a moment to find where he's hidden it. There we are. Is Matt here? I'm not seeing Matt. If not, we'll get Peter to go first. Do you want to go now, Peter? Yep. It's on the laptop, I'm assuming.
Go on with trousers. Just anywhere in your pocket, even that's slightly easier than that, just somewhere like that. That's my presenter.
Trying to work out where he's gone to. Where did Nicola go to? Because Nicola went and put it on here, I'm assuming.
I can do it off mine, just as
do it off yours.
Right.
Off yours. Be quick here.
Is the microphone working?
That microphone is working.
Good.
Yes,
that's fine.
That plugs in.
Okay, say when.
Right. Peter, at your own time, if you can, with your assistant.
Okay, this is a presentation made by my friends Animal Garden, so off we go. Come on. What we're looking at here is how we can capture and provide scientific data for the world. So the thing at the back is a tree of life, and the long word for it is phylogenetic tree, which you will hear several times, but it is just the tree of life, and all of these animals are on it. Now, I'm working with Ross Mounts at the University of Bath and Matt Wills on phylogenetic trees. There's a lot of resource spent on this. I would think tens of millions of pounds spent per year on computing phylogenetic trees, and almost all the data is thrown away. Even though there is a place to put it, it's thrown away. So this is a big problem. Where do we put our data? And the traditional approaches like institutional repositories simply don't work, and they never will work. We've put more into ours at Cambridge than anybody else, and we can't even get it out, let alone share it with other people. So we need something different. Now, you hear a lot about big data. Big data is irrelevant to this. Big data can take care of itself. NASA and astronomy, the Square Kilometre Array, they can all manage their data because they pay people to do it. But if you are in a small laboratory, and there are tens of thousands of these worldwide, we're in the long tail, and the long tail is not supported at all. You might just get a graduate student who knows how to run a server or something like that, but basically there is no support for data in laboratories throughout the world at this sort of level, the 6 to 20 person laboratory. That's not quite true. In Australia, the National Data Service, ANS, has made considerable effort here. And they've developed something called TARDIS, which is actually developed by scientists as opposed to repository managers, and it's actually used. The other area that works is crystallography, because over 30 years, the International Union of Crystallography has actually required that the community define and publish its data. You will not get published in crystallography if you do not publish your data. Now, this could be done for all other disciplines, but only the crystallographers have solved the actual human problem. It's not easy. You've got to create vocabularies. I'm on the crystallographic vocabulary committee, and we deal with stuff like this. There's no easy way, but unless the domain does it, you will not solve the problem. It can't be done elsewise. So the good thing is that there are now hundreds of thousands of structures in the literature, and we built a system that trawled the whole literature, so the literature is actually acting as a repository. You don't need a repository for crystallography so long as it's published out there. Of course, Elsevier, Wiley and Springer don't publish the data, or they put it in the closed Cambridge Crystallographic Database. An area which is even worse is computational materials. Huge amounts of money are being spent on this per year, and the amount that is archived is zero, literally zero. And this is now a national effort in many countries, and yet we're not even starting to archive data. I worked with a group in Louisiana a month ago, and they didn't even know what Dataset is. They didn't even know how to link data sets to publications. We have to solve that, and so we're trying to create materials semantics which will solve that. So, are we making progress? Well, Obama has committed to materials genome, and we're hoping that this stupid, hypey word will actually provide some resources to do this, because we do need resources. We cannot do it for free. So back to this. Here's our tree of life. Every single organism on that needs a repository. There's some for worms and flies and Arabidopsis and E. coli and so on, but that's the scale of the problem. There are tens of thousands of organisms, and they all need repositories. So where do we put it? Well, we could use Figshare, and I have a lot of time for Figshare. The key thing is it must remain open. Or, I'm with the Open Knowledge Foundation, we can put it in CCAN, which is used for government data. There's also things like Dryad and Treebase, but compared with institutional repositories, there are very few domain repositories, and we need more support. So Ross Mounts and I are going to index the whole of bioscience. Our robots are going to extract every paper from the literature because we're now allowed to do it under Hargreaves, and we will index it. And maybe I'll go to jail, but we're going to do it. And thanks to JISC for providing support for this. We're going to index species, places, and dates. So here's a buddleia, right? It goes into the index. And there are perhaps 100,000 organisms that will go into the index. The next one isn't one, but this gives me a chance to say something like the Open Knowledge Foundation, which is committed to making knowledge open and spreading it with the word. So they are committed to producing large amounts of both protocols and repositories for data. So we're getting to the end here. It's hard work. Have you got the message? We need domain repositories for science. That is the message. How are we going to do it? Well, I think realistically, the most important area in this room is JISC. JISC have got the clout to go to the powers that be and say, we need domain repositories. We need domain repositories, and we've got to find funding which may be taken from institutional repositories for domain repositories that matter to the scientists in our community. That's the end.
Brilliant, Peter. We'll do the other two, and then we'll do a QA across all three people, and then we'll switch to the next pair. Matt has now appeared. Is it me? Sorry about that. You're going to run it off. You're going to run it off yours or ours?
Yours is fine. I'm going to be looking at my laptop. Wow, this is small writing.
All right.
Hopefully I've got the right number of slides.
I don't use Windows, can you tell? You ready, sir?
Ready as I'll ever be.
Off you go.
Hi. Hang on. My timer. My name is Matt, and I'm here to talk about a very embarrassing problem that affects dozens of people in the academic community. These unfortunate individuals are victims of nothing more than circumstance. yet they are often mocked and dismissed by their peers. I am, of course, talking about researchers with very small data sets. A lot of the presentations in this conference have placed what I consider to be an extremely unfair emphasis on size, scalability, cloud storage, distributed architecture. These are all concepts that inadvertently propagate the expectation that data sets need to be prodigiously large in order to satisfy the needs of potential collaborators. This might cause less prominent academics to look at their own research output and feel insecure by comparison, like they could never possibly measure up to the gargantuan contributions offered by big names such as archive.org and Knighton at Glasgow or Southampton ePrints. However, these negative feelings of inadequacy are purely psychological and totally unnecessary. Remember, these organizations are renowned because of their impressive attributes. Expecting to be able to compete on their level is completely ridiculous. They're the exception cases, not the norm. Furthermore, while large data sets are no doubt impressive and arguably more satisfying to deposit, they are by no means the most important thing in academia. So even if you have more modestly sized outcomes, it doesn't mean you should hide away in shame. You probably have a lot more to offer the community than you might imagine. Filler, I'm speaking a little. Okay, my time is out, saying sorry. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. Who invited this guy? But also, why is he talking to me about this? And I do understand. Most of you here in this room have no such shortcomings in this area. You take great pride in your repositories, the sides of which are no doubt the stuff of legends. However, maybe you have a friend who seems strangely shy when approached on this subject, laughing awkwardly and avoiding eye contact. Perhaps you have a coworker who just has unconventional interests or unusual metadata preferences that you just can't comfortably accommodate. These are the unloved academics, potential contributors with so much to offer, yet no one to turn to, and even more critically, no tools to support them. I mean, it's not like they can just set up an entire institutional repository for their own personal use. That might be considered to be overcompensation for their shortcomings. This is why I wish to reach out a supportive hand to these suffering academics, not out of pity, but in genuine recognition of their value as researchers. I wish to let them know that regardless of size, their contributions are desirable and important. I wish to offer them a potential solution to their problem. Wait, I've missed a slide. I don't know what to do about that. I was going to say something about uploading stuff just plain into the internet as a kind of act of desperation, and it's disappointing for everyone involved. That would have been hilarious, I guess. I'm just going to fill time until it gets to the next picture. Sorry about that. Here we go. Red Feather is an ultralight alternative to traditional repositories that places a firm emphasis on simplicity and ease of use. It provides many of the most useful features of a traditional repository, but scaled down to better match the needs of an individual. It was actually a JISC RI project, a very good one, I thought. I had great fun making it. A micro-repository such as Red Feather represents a magic pill for those wishing to enhance their research performance and enables even the tiniest of data sets to pack a much heftier punch on the web. One of the main advantages of a micro-repository are the incredibly low costs associated with system installation and maintenance. Instead of requiring complex server infrastructure and years of administrative expertise, they can be trivially installed on almost any computer by almost anyone, perhaps a chimp. The entire repository is implemented within a single PHP script. It also provides a greatly simplified interface and data entry workflow, allowing you to quickly get down to business and upload your resources with no unpleasant messiness. This makes Red Feather ideal for those who are relatively inexperienced and easily intimidated when it comes to the act of depositing. Once deposited, good timing, materials are made immediately available with alluring in-browser previews for a range of file types, including audio, video, PDF, and Office documents. A selection of social media tools are also available, allowing you to spread enticing rumors about your newly acquired academic prowess. Furthermore, Red Feather is very accommodating when it comes to strange or unusually special. This is wrong. I'm doing everything wrong. Okay, this is actually about machine-readable code, such as RDF, JSON, and RSS, which enables you to submit your micro-repository to an aggregation service such as Nottingham Expert, which will increase your notoriety and attract more visitors to your site. Furthermore, this is what I was trying to say earlier, Redfeather is highly accommodating when it comes to strange or unusually specific metadata requirements. If your user demands a field to store, say, the number of times the word goat appears in a textbook, it can be easily added using Redfeather's flexible plugin system without upsetting any repository managers. In fact, a great deal of customization is possible, allowing the user to sculpt the system according to their own desires and preferences. The raw simplicity of Redfeather's architecture allows you to quickly add entirely new features or effortlessly reskin the site to integrate better with existing systems. This is actually data.ac.uk by Chris Gutteridge. He's been giving it a go recently. So, in closing, I didn't practice enough, but Redfeather helps level the repository playing field by providing less academically endowed researchers with a much more substantial tool, something that allows them to make the most of what little they might have and make a big impression. And that's the end of my presentation. Thanks for joining me in the small dataset support group. I think we made some great progress. And just remember, it's not the size of your dataset that counts, it's how you cite it.
Somehow you're going to have to follow that.
It's not possible.
I do apologize. All right, I think
Yes, I'm okay.
Try it. Are you ready, sir?
Yes.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Sebastien. I'm working at Durham University Library. I'll be talking about the custom which recently, in the last decade, was established amongst higher institutional repositories, institution to have institutional repository. In Durham, we follow the suit, and we decide to have actually 3 repositories: Durham Research Online, Durham Etheses, and Archive and Special Collection. This is a story about Durham Etheses. We started around 2009. We have a very short time period to implement our project. We have very close peripheral vision just to be ready in a few months' time. We expected to submit 300 theses per year, and we strongly would like to incline with ethos principles. So we decided to use ePrints 3.1.3. Over the time, we just realized that the choice we made sometimes provide a steep up run in terms of realizing some goals we would like to achieve. And for example, the ethos interoperability took us 2 years actually to put it in place to operate. However, we start with the small improvements. We take our repository out of the box and we spend all the time trying to customize it. It was a simple task about merging 2 style sheets. However, it took a lot of time to try to avoid different browser issues. Recently, our university decided to change the branding. Another goal we decided to have was related to the simple deposit. We just have 3 steps. The first step is about details. We populate as much information as possible from our LDAP directory. In a second step, the user decides which file is uploaded, and that's it. Also, we decide to customize cover pages. ePrints comes with a very interesting LaTeX-based templates. However, they are not interested inside what you see as a content. So we decide to add how to cite our thesis, how to use policy, and you also somehow find some issues around UTF-8 encoding. So we decide to correct those problems. Everybody loves statistics, we as do. We decide to use Google Analytics for the full text downloads. It takes us some 2 steps development. It was the first step just to change the ePrints code to record stats, and then we define a special profile in the Google Analytics so we can see actually the data even in a department level. The big goal for us was to interoperate with Ethos. We took out of the box Ethos plugin, and then we realized there's a lot of mistake in the plugin. So we spent some time trying to correct it. Most notably, we add information about embargo. And over the time, Ethos started harvesting us. Ethos also, the British Library provides also digitization service for us. So we developed a command line tool which allows us to download this information back to our repository. and we load them. And then we just realized that what would happen if Ethos would try to reharvest this information again. And this is actually my next slide. So we change a little bit the model. We add additional information representing persistent ID on the editorial level. And we change our IPMH plugin to filter this information, not to be harvested by Ethos. So we try to be rather proactive in this game. Recently, we shared this knowledge on the workshop. I mentioned a few times that the version of reprints we use had UTF-8 encoding issues. We didn't have to spend the time trying to upgrade to the better version of reprints. However, we changed our internal database to avoid those issues. As you can see, they can spoil the effect. You have a nice repository, a lot of data, but they are not presented in a way as they should. With the beginning, we didn't consider using Creative Commons license. On some point, users approach us and they ask us, we would like to use this specific Creative Commons license. So we spent some time trying to rewrite information about licensing, and we currently support 3 different jurisdictions: England and Wales, US, and the world. We also spent some time trying to customize out-of-the-box our IPMH plugin, so we can see this information about the licensing, and we also spent some time to push this information in a creative, cover pages. So it's clear to the user how we can use it. I mentioned we have more than one repository. Durham Research Online is an older brother of the Durham Etheses, and we use Google Custom Search to provide a single search box so the user can actually go to one place and see also, like, in a separate tab, information about the thesis. We spent some time trying to customize information, how they are present on this search box. Currently, we are doing a digitization project. We have around 10,000 paper books. And some of the interesting material which came, supplementary material which came to the books, are DVDs, CDs, cassette tapes. So far, we are half through the way. All of this information are available through our repository. The oldest one is 1938. Recently, we just discovered that we need to comply with the European Union cookies law. And it was a little bit like a running in the dark, especially we don't know whether the Google cookies are essential or not, whether we can use them with the service or not. So this is something like the big challenge to us, how we are going to solve this. Over the time, we just find out that we need to change our goals and slightly improve our initial expectation to the repository. We find out that the user would like to upload more than one file in various formats. We also find out that some users try to send to us encrypted PDF, so we try to stop them doing these things. All of these changes actually, like, over the time, push us to think about sustainability. On one level, we make a mistake not to push operational support to the central IT. We just realized the more changes we do in the old ePrints code, the harder it would be to migrate to the new repository. And also that every change in the repository somehow possesses the information against departments. We have some plans how we would like to improve our repository. We would like to review processes, be paper-free, migrate to the new repository of the future, try to actively support Creative Commons license, possibly support supplement of data sets, also be a little bit more connected with our institution CRIS system. On this point, I believe we can start thinking that in the next 5 years' time, there will be another goal about the repository of the future, and then we would like to present it in a special way. Thank you.
Right. We conveniently, Peter Burnhill was supposed to be presenting next, but he's not here, not going to produce, so we can actually take some Q&A for Peter, Matt, and Sebastien, if anybody has any questions. Do you want to come up? Do you want to come up and ask any questions?
Sorry. Question really for Peter and Matt, because you both seem to be talking about aspects of quite a similar problem. I mean, whether your data sets are small often equates with long tail, and long tail with small. And whilst you started from a similar place, you've ended up in quite different places. I know your views, Peter, quite strongly, and I understand where they come from, that domain repositories are the only way one is going to make this data useful, and yet Matt, you clearly seen value in building what you built with Red Feather. Perhaps the two of you could just have a discussion about this now, or offer different. Are your views really as different as they seem to be to me?
No, I wouldn't say so. I think that my motivation was more of a case of how simple could you make a repository-like system. Because I don't like to call Redfeather an actual repository. That normally offends people such as yourselves, because it's like, you know, it's just a script. But it does a lot of the things that I find most of the people I work with are likely to do. I'm in a kind of side area of repositories. I do teaching and learning repositories primarily, so I work with EdShare in Southampton. And they have what I think are much lower repository requirements than most of the rest of the community. They want very simple things, but they want the things to look nice and they want them to be, you know, easy to use. They want to be able to get the academics who don't normally enter data to enter the data. And with that, you want to try and avoid like big, long data workflows. You want to avoid difficult like embargo type things. And I work on ePrints. EdShare is an ePrints. And I find that a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is like, how can I persuade ePrints to make this actually happen without trying to force me to do this and that and this and the other. So that's the reason. I was just like, what do we really need to do this particular task? And then do it with nothing else. That was the idea behind it.
So, you know, I can see the value of this, and the challenge is a social one. If we could get functionality onto people's laptops and get them using it because it was useful, then we have a big tool. But that has proved almost impossible over many years, right? So that's the problem, is distributing it, right? And we need the people who can distribute are Apple and Google and Mendeley and the rest of them, because they want to own our soul and they do a pretty good job of it. So unless we actually compete against them and put effort into getting our community where they're using our tools for our purposes, we'll end up actually using the repositories which are built by Apple and the rest of them, because that's where it's going to go. So the idea is right to put it on the iPhone. The problem is we won't be doing it. Having said that, when we come to long-tail data, we have a problem because of the diversity. What you have to do is you have to find those people who value it most. So you've got to go to the people with a mixture of the most money and most political power and say, do you want something for, I don't know, deep sea corals or you know, or birds of the high mountains or whatever it might be. And I think you've got to build a few repositories of those sort, make a success, and then try and get it moved into the rest of the community.
Anybody else any questions, or should we? Oh, there's one hiding at the back. Come on, Matt, you can stand up.
Challenge stuff and the closing keynote. So thank you very much, folks. We will be voting later on.